prosper phase, the final phase of any fat loss diet. This is phase 3. We have gone through the primer phase, which is preparing somebody for the diet. We have gone through the progressive phase, which is actually taking somebody through the fat loss diet. And now we are on the prosper phase, which is how we take somebody from the diet and transition them into a maintenance phase and beyond. And the reason we call this the prosper phase is because prosper means to be successful. It means to be very fortunate. It means a successful ongoing. This is why Star Trek says live long and prosper, because they want to live long and prosper, be successful continuously. And that's really what the goal is here. How do we make sure that this person sticks with the result that they got from the diet long term without actually feeling like they're dieting? So in this video, you are going to learn how we take a client who has successfully lost body fat and how we transition them through a reverse diet and then into a phase where they're most likely not tracking anymore, because most people don't want to track forever. And throughout this video, we're going to touch on 5 key points of the prosper phase. Point number 1 is setting expectations and a specific timeline for the client, because they just got done with a diet. So the last thing we want is to go into an ongoing phase that we don't know when it ends. Much like a diet where we want to calculate the rate of loss per week and know exactly when we're starting and when we're finishing, which eliminates a lot of the stress in the client's shoes, we're going to do that with this prosper phase as well. Number 2 is establishing a long-term goal. If the person doesn't visualize where they want to be long-term, it's hard to guide them in the right direction, and it's difficult for them to remember what they're doing, why they're doing it, and where they're actually going throughout this process. Number 3 is actually beginning the reverse diet. We've established some of these baseline points and the foundation of their visual goal that they want to attain long-term. And then we begin the reverse diet process to begin that. Then we're going to determine fundamental habits, because there are certain things that need to stick around long-term when tracking goes away. And that's when we end up at number 5, which is moving into the hybrid tracking model, which is where we're removing tracking macros most of the time. Now, before we actually get into the weeds of this, I want to show you some actual clients. So this first one is Joanna. This is 3 progress pictures. And I think this is really important because you don't see this very often. With coaching companies and fitness challenges and all that stuff, you see before, after. But what happens after the after? They disappear. We don't see their clients. And why would we? Because most of the time they hire them for a challenge, they get the result, and then they're gone. But we know that most research shows people often gain the weight back after weight loss happens. For us, our main priority is sustainable weight loss, because nobody wants to lose weight temporarily. They want to lose weight permanently. And that's why we break up any fat loss diet into 3 phases, and we take our time doing it the right way. So Joanna lost the weight, as you can see in second picture. And then in the third picture, this is her a year later, still maintaining the weight. So we have a before, after, and then after the after. Start, finish, and follow up. This next one is a male client. I wanted to show you 2 different ones. This is Aaron. Aaron got lean, lost weight. Then he actually built muscle and sustained it long term. So we have, again, start, finish, follow up. Before, after, and after the after. And the cool thing about Aaron is he is a professional wrestler. So he is actually literally on TV wrestling with AEW, the TNT network. And it was awesome to be able to see him do this, transform, and be on television week after week after week after week after the diet is completely over and sustain the physique he built. In fact, it keeps getting better because we were able to implement certain things within the reverse diet that he took along the way after the diet was done to continue improving his physique without necessarily feeling like he's dieting all the time, really, because he's not. And we're going to get to that when we dive into the reverse diet phase. Now, as I'm going through this prosper phase, I want you to reflect on this graphic. I touched on this in another video that I have filmed about macros not being forever, right? Like a solution, a temporary diet for a permanent solution. So go check out that video if you haven't yet. But this is the self-formation process. We have self-control, which is a skill and a trait that we develop through some of the dieting process. It's a little bit more meticulous, weighing your food, tracking macros, things like that. Moves us into self-discipline, which is a trait that we develop as we get better with results and taking action and leaning into discomfort of the diet, because self-discipline is what we use to do the work when we don't feel like doing the work because maybe we don't have motivation all the time, which is very realistic. From there, we shift into self-belief. At this point, we've gotten some results and we see the proof of our labor. We see that we can do this and we have proof of that, and that fuels our self-belief and eliminates some of our self-doubt. And eventually this leads to self-respect, which is when we have the result we want, we're going to have more self-respect, gratitude, appreciation, because we're becoming the individual that we set out to become. And we followed through with what we said we would achieve. right? And if we look at this from a nutrition model lens, we have tracking meticulously. And when I say meticulously, I don't mean restrictive or rigid, because we're still focusing on ranges. So even if we're tracking protein, fats, and carbs, all three, and we're weighing our food, it doesn't mean that we have to hit each macro on the gram every time. Sometimes it doesn't even mean we have to track all of our food. Some days we are more intuitive. Some days we don't track at all. Some days it's calories and protein. But the point is, we are tracking, we are looking at the metrics, the data, the measurements of food, and we are being a little more analytical with that. That is going to develop self-control. That's going to build a result with that, and and the tracking is going to develop self-discipline, which is where we're tracking and maintaining. This is after the result is achieved. Eventually, we go into hybrid tracking, which is a little bit more of that self-belief, because we have to trust ourselves in order to remove tracking, which is going to eventually lead us to self-respect, which is being mindful and intentional. Not intuitive, but intentional. You trust yourself, you respect yourself, and you are going to treat your body the way you want to treat it based on self-respect. And that means you can be mindful and more intentional with good decisions because you are investing in your health every day. It's a non-negotiable. This process is essentially what naturally and subconsciously happens as a client goes through the primary phase, the progressive phase, and the prosper phase when done correctly. So this first step number one inside of this prosper phase, we have setting expectations and an actual timeline. So first question is, how long will the reverse diet be? Most people that we have surveyed and asked questions to, either after they have worked with us already or as they're coming on board, say the same thing. They want more details around what they are going to do. They don't necessarily always need a detailed plan. Some people like more details than others, but everybody wants to know where they're going. Nobody wants to be walking down a dark path and they don't know how long it is. And that's why during each of these phases, we have to really paint the whole picture and share the blueprint with them. And if we don't, they're going to be left in the dark. And that's not a good feeling. That's not being a good leader. So we have to determine how long the reverse diet will be, and we need to show them how long it's going to be. Now, how long it should be is dependent on the person. Typically, we would recommend 0.5 to 1 times the dieting duration. So if somebody dieted for 6 months, that could be a 3 to 6 month reverse diet. So it takes just as long, which I would say is only the case if somebody is very fearful of regaining weight. Maybe they have a very adaptive metabolism and we're worried about rapidly gaining weight. Or mentally, they just struggle with eating more food. And we often see this with women trying to lose fat too, where they struggle just to increase calories and the idea of the scale going up really freaks them out. So we might take a little bit longer, right? But ideally, we're going closer to that 0.5, which is half as long as they took to diet, because I would rather get their calories up and out of the deficit number or range as quickly as possible to reverse some biofeedback, negative biofeedback markers. Now, the thing to also realize here is it does depend on the person, because if somebody diets for a year or a year and a half because they have a lot of weight to lose, this whole calculation kind of goes out the window, right? You don't need to reverse diet for a year and a half if you dieted for a year and a half because you had 80 pounds to lose. That's not how this works. So essentially, if it's a 6 month or less diet, maybe 9 months or less, this calculation can be pretty effective and accurate. However, the longer the diet is, the less likely this is going to be justifiable, because we don't want to take too long with a reverse diet, because that can prolong any negative side effects that they've had or symptoms they've had from the diet itself. The next thing we have to figure out is how high will their maintenance calories be? Right? They're going to be lower than before, potentially. If they started at 3,000 calories and they lost 30 pounds, their metabolism doesn't need those 3,000 calories to support the same amount of body mass because they have less body mass. So naturally, their calorie intake is going to be lower. Now, on the flip side, if somebody increases slowly, they might actually see a hyper responder kind of approach or response to the diet, where as their calories go up, their movement increases, their training intensity increases, their training volume naturally increases, they're walking more, stepping more, standing more. That can lead to a higher energy output and may allow them to increase close to, if not all the way to where they were. I've even seen people pass where they used to be. But it's not because it's some reverse diet magic. It's because their metabolism adapted and they're moving more. So they're burning more calories than they were before. But regardless, we have to give them some kind of expectation. Even if it's like, hey, I don't know where your calories are going to end up. They could be lower because you're lighter. You're less human from a mass perspective, but you're more active. So it could be even higher. And now maybe you started endurance running and you're burning a ton. It could be even higher than it was at the beginning, or it could be just there. The point is let's educate them on the different tiers of where it could be so they know what to expect. Next, what's realistic from a body fat level to sustain? And the reality is here, if you're Gen Pop and you're just trying to lose body fat to get to a place where you're sustainably lean and healthy, you can expect to maintain the exact amount of fat loss you achieved. If you got down to that lean result, as you saw in those other two photos, you're not shredded to the gills like a bodybuilder, but you are leaner than the average person. You can absolutely sustain that after a reverse and after the diet. If you're a physique competitor, you shouldn't even try. It is very unhealthy for your hormones. It's unhealthy for your mindset. It's unhealthy for numerous things. You don't need to get on stage and try to stay that way all the time. I'm personally 20 pounds heavier than when I stepped on stage last time. And I'm still at a healthy body fat and lean. I didn't put on a ton of weight. So just goes to show that you don't want to be that lean. And so it's really just letting the client know, and you as the coach would be determining which situation they're in and explaining why that's important to know. And then the last part of this expectations and timeline is what adjustments are you going to be making going forward? The big one that we know is going to be increasing calories in one way or another, which I'll get to in a sec. And the other one is potentially increasing volume in the gym. If the person does desire to eat more as the reverse diet goes and they want to potentially build muscle, there's a very, very viable case to increase training volume as you increase your calories, specifically your carbohydrates, because those carbs are going to go right to training hard in the gym, filling your muscle with glycogen, and that's going to bring nutrients and hydration into the muscle, which will lead to better strength, better volume, and of course, more muscle growth. So the main adjustments we're going to be making are really just increasing calories, usually via carbs, sometimes fats too, and then potentially increasing training volume if their schedule allows and they desire muscle growth throughout the process. But we should tell them this too, so that they know all the things that are going to come about. Next, we have to determine and establish their long-term goals. We know how long this reverse diet's going to take, but understand that the reverse diet is just from I finish the diet to I'm back at maintenance. This is not the long-term solution. It's a short period of time of just increasing your carbohydrates. We have a lot of work to do after the fact. And the best way to determine what comes next, how fast to go about the reverse diet, where you want to take the client, is to determine their long-term goals and really establish concrete goals that they want to end up at, right? And so a couple things to understand here is visualizing this is going to be really important for the client. And there's a couple research studies that have looked at this, and most of it is called MIT, motor imagery training. Here's a quote from one of them. Research on individuals using motor imagery training has shown that using MIT produces greater outcomes and levels of achievement compared to the groups who did not use MIT. Easy example of this is a study they used on basketball players. All the groups of basketball players were in off season. So no more training in the court. It's just gym, right? And group A didn't do anything. They just took a complete rest. I believe it was 8 weeks. Don't quote me on it. It was a period of time that was normal for most studies. Group A wasn't in the gym training. Group B was not in the group gym training, but they were visualizing themselves in the gym. So although they weren't working out, Group B was actually visualizing themselves lifting with heavy loads, specifically 85% of their 1 rep max, with the bench and the squat. Group C was also visualizing themselves in the gym, but not actually training. However, they were visualizing explosive exercises and lifts. At the end of this study, they brought these people back into the gym. Group A that didn't do any training or visual imagery training, so motor imagery training, they actually regressed. They got weaker, as expected if you don't train for 8+ weeks. Group B did get stronger in those lifts. They actually progressed their strength, and they were the ones that were imagining themselves lifting at 85% of their 1 rep max during the off period. Group C didn't regress. They didn't progress strength, but they did progress in their explosive power development movements. So they actually got better at the power movements because that's what they were visualizing. And it just goes to show the power of your mind. And this translates to a physique standpoint because, as this next quote shows, recent studies show that when we immerse ourselves in visualization with all 5 senses, so like literally imagining yourself with all 5 senses if possible, our brains react to the imagined scenarios as if they are real, creating neural connections that activate confidence, willpower, and willingness to take action towards goals. So the purpose of this is pretty simple. Decide where you want to be. 6 months, 1 year, 3 years, whatever it is, create a visual of where you want to be, who you want to become, and what your physique looks like at that time after the diet's done. And if it looks exactly the same, then you need to visualize yourself in a year from now with the same exact physique. That's how important it is to be crystal clear with the goal that comes after the goal. Because it's not enough to just achieve the goal. Everybody who wants to achieve a weight loss goal wants to sustain that weight loss. So you need to visualize and imagine yourself 6 months, 1 year, 3 years down the line at that weight that you achieved. Now that we've established the timeline, the expectations, we visualize the goal, we can begin the reverse diet. And this is really simple. I've had countless videos, countless of articles, podcasts on reverse dieting. We've taken countless clients. You can actually Google search reverse diet transformation, and my client's the first image on Google. Like, we have done this with so many people. And it's really simple. First, we got to determine reverse diet or recovery diet. If they got extremely lean for stage, or they crash dieted, or we saw some hormone issues, we're going to go with a recovery diet. That means we're going to rapidly reverse those calories up to fix the biofeedback symptoms, the negative biofeedback and stress that we've gotten from the diet. Versus a reverse diet is, hey, this person generally feels fine. They're a little tired because they're not eating as much, and they got pretty lean, but they're not shredded like a bodybuilder. We're going to go slower, because why risk gaining body fat when we can just slowly increase? Their adherence is going to be better. Their confidence and their mindset going into the reverse diet will be better if it's slow. And we don't have any physiological concerns because they're generally pretty healthy and they're totally fine going slow with the reverse diet. Then we start increasing calories post-diet. Most of the time, I'm going to suggest anywhere between a 10 to a 25% increase in calories, depending on if we're going reverse or recovery diet. And this is going to be via carbohydrates, because if possible, we're going to keep fats in a healthy spot, protein's going to stay up, and we're going to dial the carbs back and forth to go into a deficit and come out of a deficit. Fats would come next if they need it. So if we need to increase their fats beyond what they were, or we had to drop fats during the diet, which is fine too, we need to replace those to make sure that the hormones are healthy as well. Next, we just look at the initial prescription of reverse diet. And so what we would probably want to do after we make a plan for bringing those calories up is starting with protein. If the person isn't increasing protein enough, or we need to increase calories, but we don't know which one to go with first, if there's room to increase protein, there's nothing wrong with increasing protein. It's going to stimulate their metabolism, not in the same way, but it will. It's going to make sure that they increase calories, and it's not going to store as body fat, but it's going to keep them very satiated. And the nice part about this is it's going to eliminate the fear of increasing the amount of food they're eating if they're somebody who is very fearful of the scale or eating a lot of food. We see a lot of people that go through a diet, and when it comes time to reverse and increase calories, they're scared. They don't want to lose their progress, understandably. And even if we know they're not going to, because we understand the strategy we're going to use, it might be hard for them to be fully bought in at that point. And if we increase their protein, we can increase their calories. They won't gain any body fat at all, and it will prove to them everything's going to be fine. And it's a little bit of a trick to get people into the initial reverse diet without freaking out. And this is part of our job as coaches, is to balance this real lifestyle and emotional side of it while making sure we're doing what we need to do with the nutrients to get them where they want to be. As we do that, or after we do that, we're going to start with the carbs, then we'll move to the fats. And then we're going to linearly increase carbs while we increase training volume if they have room for it. So if we want to make sure that we're building muscle and we're not putting on body fat during the reverse as well as we can, we are going to increase carbohydrates while also increasing their training volume. Even if it's just adding a set here or there, you could add a day a week in the gym. If a person is a hybrid athlete, you could increase their miles per week. But typically, it's a really good way to ensure that the calories are going to good use, and we can increase calories faster and kind of mitigate and compensate a little bit to avoid accumulating too much fat during that reverse diet. Now, after we've done this reverse diet, we have to build some fundamental habits. What are the habits that we have been acquiring throughout the diet and during this reverse diet period that are going to be staples moving forward? Because the reality is no matter who we're working with, 99% of the time, we're trying to move to a place of not tracking macros anymore, because most people don't want to weigh their food or track their macros forever, right? There's some coaches or athletes that might want to do that, and that's fine. But at some point they won't. And we need to learn what allows people to stick with a program or a diet or an eating plan or anything that is allowing them to progress with their weight without actually needing to track. Because behind the scenes of the numbers, there's other things going on. And if we can focus more on these other things, we can eliminate the tracking and maintain the success. And so there's a list of 17 things that have actually been proven in research to be the reason why people who sustain weight loss results after the diet is done are able to do so. And that's cognitive restraint, which is just being able to cognitively remove calories. You're putting yourself in a deficit, or refraining from treats or trigger foods or anything like that. So you're stopping yourself from indulging in things, and that's a skill. Self-monitoring, that could be stepping on the scale, measuring with a tape measure. It could be progress pictures, could be tracking, anything. You need some kind of metric. Delayed gratification, which is the idea that what I'm doing now is going to pay off dividends later on. And I'm more worried about the later on goal than I am the right now goal, right? Number 4 is structured training routine, having an actual plan to the gym. Number 5 is accountability and social support, whether it's a coach, group of friends, a Facebook group, an app, a tracker, whatever it is, some form of accountability is required. Eat lower calorie foods. So think of high volume, low calorie foods. Whole foods is the gist of it. High protein diet is another, expected. Eat more fibrous foods. Prioritize sleep quality so that your stress is low, your recovery is high, which leads into the next one. Manage stress well is number 10. Number 11 is limiting or eliminating snacking. Most people who sustain weight loss stick to solid meals. Even if it is a meal that is an apple, a protein shake, and some peanut butter, it's a balanced meal that they're almost using as like a template. They're putting the macros together. It's multiple ingredients. It's not a bar or some peanuts, some kind of snack. Number 12 is practicing mindful eating. Those who sustain weight loss have actually consciously practiced this and wanted to get better at mindful eating. Number 13 is avoiding emotional eating. So they learn how to cope with emotions outside of just food. Number 14 is valuing hard work. They feel good when their effort is high and they value hard work in others. Number 15 is emotional intelligence. 16 is flexible control. So you have self-control, but you know when to turn it off and on. And 17 is eating low glycemic foods, which is really just whole foods once again. So there's like 3 or 4 of those that really just lead to eat real foods more than you eat processed foods and you're going to be okay. And if we look at these 17 things, these naturally happen when we're targeting fat loss by tracking calories and or eating healthy. And so if we're tracking calories and or eating healthy, we're doing these things. But when we recognize these things and we can understand them on a deeper level, now we can actually sustain the result we achieved far easier because we recognize what is behind the scenes actually causing that to happen. And when we know that, we can remove the tracking, which leads us into the next thing, and that is moving to a hybrid model of tracking. So the hybrid tracking model for us really comes down to just removing tracking. And we call it hybrid because sometimes you track, sometimes you don't. There's a few things here that can be defined as hybrid tracking model. The first one is taking an intuitive diet break to practice. So if somebody's tracking, they finish the diet or even during the diet and they're going to Disneyland with their family and they say, and this has happened many times, Coach, how should I adjust my macros? How should I track? Should I bring a scale? And we say, no, you shouldn't bring a scale. You shouldn't worry about tracking. In fact, you should just be intuitive. This is great practice. Holidays, camping trips, vacations, they're all practice to be more mindful, more intentional, and use all those habits I just went over, all 17 of those things, thinking about those things when you're in those situations so that you can sustain or achieve a better result without tracking. And so the first step in moving into a hybrid model really is just being able to take those intuitive diet breaks, whether you're intuitively in a deficit or you're intuitively eating at maintenance matters less. It's the act of not tracking and having the bumpers in your bowling lane, for example. The second one is practicing part-time tracking. Very similar, but maybe it's, I'm not tracking on the weekends. You know, maybe it starts with, I'm just not going to track on Saturday. Or maybe it's like, I'm not going to track on the monthly date night for my husband and I. And just that one day and that one dinner, you don't track. And then it moves into a bi-weekly and then a weekly and then a couple days a week. And you just slowly but surely remove tracking. You can also start by just tracking protein or tracking protein and calories and just removing the other macros. You can track specific habits. So maybe we remove MyFitnessPal entirely, but now we're tracking your mood, how you feel. You're tracking your weight, your measurements, stuff like that. That's still a form of cognitive restraint and actually looking at the metrics, right? It is a form of self-monitoring, as we just said in the last slide, where you're monitoring your progress. And we can track any form of progress because it's still accountability and it still keeps you on the same track towards your goals or the goal you've already reached. And then the last one is recording biofeedback and thoughts. So similar to what I just said. What is your mood like? What is your feeling? How is your digestion? How is your energy? Like after you eat certain meals, when you went out and you overate and you ate like crap and you drank too much, talk to yourself, journal about this. What did you feel the next day? Because the only way you're going to avoid it or eliminate it or even just limit it so you don't go overboard next time is if you actually recognize and build awareness around how it makes you feel. If it doesn't make you feel great or it takes you further from your goals, you need to actually look at that in order to remove that feeling from happening again. And this happens while constantly reminding yourself of your visualized goal that we talked about earlier, because that is a massive point of this. And so when we look at this prosper phase, what we have here really is creating a clear picture of what to expect after the diet and how long this is going to take to get out of the diet. Then we visualize what our long-term self goal is. Who do we want to be? What do we want to look like? What do we want our physique to look like? How do we want our performance to be, our movement, our digestion, health, whatever? Really try to visualize what that looks like in your life long-term, because that's where we're heading towards. Then we start the reverse diet, which is more of the analytical process. Let's actually track the macros and bring the calories up so we can get you out of a deficit before we just start going straight into intuitive and mindful eating. Then we start to recognize the fundamental habits you've acquired over the course of the diet so that you can know what actually works long-term that doesn't require a food scale or MyFitnessPal. And last but not least, we start shifting into this hybrid tracking model before we get to a place that is completely intentional, not intuitive, because intuitively we probably want to eat like crap and drink beer all the time. Intentionally, we want to eat to fuel our body and just have balance. Right? And so the hybrid tracking model allows us to inch towards that. And when we put these three phases together, the primer phase, the progressive phase, and the prosper phase, you have a periodized approach to your fat loss nutrition that allows you to prepare your body for a diet, conquer a diet way more successfully, and then pull yourself out of the diet in a way that actually establishes long-term success so that you don't have to try to lose the weight again down the road because you gained it back after. We have put hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people through this exact phase because after years of doing this, we realized that there was a specific method that worked better than any other. And we wanted to create this phase by phase approach for our clients and for our coaching staff to be able to take people through. Whether you're a coach or a person trying to lose weight, you can use this too. And I promise you, your results will be better and they will last longer.